Dear friends of the Sydney, Australia, Cuba Friendship Society, I'm very, very glad to be able to give you an update and greetings from the National Committee to Free the Cuban Five in the U.S. On this, the upcoming 13th anniversary of the arrest of the Cuban Five. On Monday, we will be holding a press conference with some of the attorneys who have been fighting for 13 years to free our brothers, including Ramon Labañino's attorney, Bill Norris, one of Gerardo Hernandez's attorneys, Richard Clue, and Phil Horowitz's attorney, Phil Horowitz, the attorney for Rene Gonzalez. As you may know, on Friday, October 7th, Rene is going to be released from Mariana Federal Correctional Institute. It is a prison that is almost 700 miles from Miami. Even though it's in Florida, it's a very, very long distance. And the issue facing Rene is that the judge, when she sentenced him in 2001, gave him a 5-year parole sentence after he was released from prison. And she ordered him not to be around any of the terrorists. She said the word terrorists, so she admits that they exist. But Rene's wife has been denied entry to the United States for these 13 years. And therefore, if they're going to try to force Rene to stay in the U.S., what they intend to do is deny him the comfort, love, and accompaniment of his wife, Olga. That's one of the pressing issues for us, and why Phil Horowitz will be speaking on the press conference to give publicity to this issue and demand the right of Rene, the minute he steps out of prison, to be able to fly home to Cuba. The other 5 are in the midst of various stages of their final appeal in the United States because of the law that was signed by Clinton in 1996, the effective death penalty and anti-terrorism law, which is a very repressive law that effectively wiped out the right of habeas corpus, except for a limited process, 1-year time limit, after one's direct appeal is exhausted. And therefore, this is their last legal chance. Gerardo Hernandez has filed a reply to the government's response, which is opposing his motion for either vacating, that is, eliminating the conviction, or granting him a new trial and an evidentiary hearing. Gerardo's appeal is based on 2 issues. One, that his attorney, Paul McKenna, was ineffective counsel because he argued Gerardo's case from a completely erroneous point of view. Gerardo's major charge against him, which was a totally false, outrageous charge, was that the government said he conspired with Cuba to deliberately plan to shoot down the Brothers to the Rescue planes in 1996 in international waters, which means that the U.S. believes that any area outside of Cuba's 12-mile limit is U.S. jurisdiction. It's, again, outrageous. First of all, Gerardo had nothing to do with planning the shoot down, and second of all, neither Cuba nor Gerardo planned to shoot planes down in international waters. It was Cuba's right of self-defense against continuing incursions into Cuban airspace, including the buzzing of buildings in Havana. But when the Cuban Five were arrested, the government took 7 months to try to find a charge that would link the 5 to the shoot down of the planes. You probably have heard right now that Bill Richardson, who is the former governor of New Mexico, one of the states of the U.S., and was an official in the Clinton administration at the time of the shoot down of the planes by Cuba and at the time of the 1998 arrest of the Cuban Five. He's in Cuba right now, calling for Cuba to release Alan Gross, the American who was an employee of one of the subcontracted corporations that is known as a front for the CIA. Alan Gross is part of a whole team of people from the U.S. who are trying to infiltrate Cuba to bring satellite equipment, espionage equipment, cell phones that are not traceable by anybody, which would be a direct link to the United States government. All of this parallel communications network is part of trying to create the technology and the infrastructure for when the U.S. decides that they can create a pretext for aggression against Cuba and try to foster an opposition inside the island. This is really part of the plans or the program of the U.S. of subversion, of counter-revolution for the more than 50 years of the Cuban Revolution's existence. And this is part of the reason why the Cuban Five were in Miami. They were trying to protect their country from U.S. terrorism and destabilization efforts. So the reason I bring up this case, which may not be related, about Alan Gross, is that Bill Richardson, when he was a UN official for the United States, at the time of the plane shoot-down, he had gone to Cuba in the days before the shoot-down. The shoot-down took place February 24th, 1996, and he had personally assured Fidel Castro that Clinton promised him that the Brothers to the Rescue planes would not be allowed to take off on the day that they had announced, February 24th, 1996. Brothers to the Rescue had said, "We will fly into Cuba because it is our right to, quote, bring democracy to Cuba." And the U.S. knew of this impending flight. In fact, the morning of the invasion by Brothers to the Rescue, the head of Brothers to the Rescue, Basulto, Jose Basulto, his license was suspended. And yet today the U.S. government says that they had no idea that Cuba was going to shoot down the planes, or they also said that they had no legal means to stop the flights of Brothers to the Rescue. We know that that's totally bogus. The U.S. has no qualms about kidnapping, rendition, everything they use in their power. But there were legal means for the U.S. to stop the flights of Brothers to the Rescue. The second part of Gerardo's appeal, which is the fundamental part of Ramon's and Antonio's and soon to be Fernando's appeal, is based on the new evidence that was discovered several years after the five were convicted. As you know, the defense attorneys during trial tried to have the trial moved out of Miami venue because of the extreme hostility in the city. But the judge denied the defense several times. But 5 years later, it was discovered that several Miami journalists were on the U.S. government payroll while purporting to be independent journalists. Based on that discovery, the National Committee, we began in January 2009 an extensive research, including filing our own Freedom of Information Act requests, which requires the government to give information from government agencies. Oftentimes they deny it, but we have collected hundreds of articles from the Miami press, many of which were written by the Miami journalists who were on the government payroll, and we have uncovered many more Miami reporters who were on the payroll of Radio and TV Marti, which is official U.S. propaganda stations beamed into Cuba. This is something that none of the parties knew during trial, and if the attorneys had known that there was a whole coterie of reporters who were receiving government money from the very stations whose purpose is to try to destabilize Cuban society from within by beaming these propaganda into Cuba, it would have given the attorneys a much, much stronger means for moving the trial out of the city of Miami. And therefore, the work that the National Committee has done is absolutely crucial. It is part of their appeals, as I said, and constitutes what we believe a great hope for an evidentiary hearing to get more discovery from the government, more evidence that would require the government to give up the information they've been trying to withhold from us, as well as showing the most egregious government misconduct in the case of the Five's prosecution. And we are so thankful for the work that Mara Ochoa has done, along with other translators. We could send article after article to Mara, and when she would turn them right around to us. And this is what enabled us, the volunteer work of many, many activists to put together this huge record of the media coverage, which was never in the slightest bit even pretending to be neutral or journalistic ethics. It was all heavily, heavily weighed against the five, against anyone related to defending Cuba, especially in relation to the plane shootdown. So again, we're very, very thankful for your solidarity, and it's just one example of how the international and in the United States, the national Cuban Five support work, when we work together, can collaborate, can share our experiences, can help each other, we can be a much, much greater weight in the struggle to free Gerardo, Antonio, Ramon, Fernando, and René. So sisters and brothers, I hope I've helped give you some of what's taking place in their work. The attorneys are expecting any day now a response from the judge, a decision by her in relation to Gerardo's appeal, because now both parties, prosecution and defense, have submitted everything that they are entitled to submit to back their arguments, and now it is up to the judge. In the previous appeals of the five, when they were denied by the judge their motions for overturning the trial or overturning the convictions, the next steps were automatic in appeals in going to the 11th Circuit or to the Supreme Court. However, with the habeas corpus appeal, it's another restriction against the defendant's right that if the judge turns down the motion for redress, it's not an automatic right to go to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals, which, by the way, is a very conservative court. A judge from that panel or the appeals court has to agree that there is grounds. And as we've said all along in these over 10 years now of struggle for the Cuban Five after they were convicted, the legal aspect is only as strong as a political struggle for the five, whether it's mobilizations, demonstrations, forums, reaching out to parliamentarians, everything we can do to bring the cause and the case of the five to the public worldwide. In fact, that work was proven to be effective when we heard the words of the prosecutor, Carolyn Heck Miller, in December 2009, when Ramon's life sentence was struck down along with Antonio's life sentence and Fernando's 19-year sentence when they were in court, and we were filling the courtroom with the supporters in Miami to hear the resentencing. The prosecutor, Carolyn Heck Miller, said, and we were so astounded to hear it, she said, for the defense and the prosecution to agree to this reduction that they were recommending for Antonio, she said, it will help calm the turbulent waters that are swirling around this case worldwide. It's a recognition by the government that they feel the pressure. We have to keep the pressure, sisters and brothers, because there are more and more editorials, comments by prominent media people, like the editorial that came out by Dwayne Wickham in the USA Today, a national newspaper that has a circulation of hundreds of thousands across the country. And he called for the swap exchange for Alan Gross, who's in Cuban prison, with the Cuban Five. I'll conclude by letting you know that we are preparing the Washington Post ad, text, and design. We're just about there with all the funds, and we will be placing it in the Washington Post. Also, please check out the website, freethefive.org. Be sure and sign up to receive our emails. We try very hard to limit the amount of emails, maybe 2 a month, so that people don't feel overwhelmed, but each one we send has important information. You will be able to read and hear the transcript and audio of the press conference of Monday the 12th with the attorneys to hear more about what the case is about, their arguments for the five, and the website reportersforhire.org, which details all the contracts that we have obtained to prove the U.S. government and Miami media collaboration against the Five, as well as our analysis in that website, reportersforhire.org. So together, again, we can free the Five. Thank you so much for your solidarity and our best wishes for your success.